Parliamentarian delegations representing 30 different countries stressed that presidential elections in Syria have been fair and democratic. Counting votes in the election centers confirms that turnout in Syria's presidential elections was high. Russia renews its rejection of Chapter 7 in any draft resolution about the humanitarian situation in Syria. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our news for today. Representatives of foreign delegations observing Syria's presidential elections stressed that the voting process in Syria's presidential elections was fair and marked by a high turnout. The representatives were speaking during a consultative meeting of parliamentarians, independent figures and NGOs who came to Syria upon the People's Assembly's invitation to oversee how the balloting ran. In a final communiqué issued after the meetings, the delegations stressed that the presidential elections were competitive for the first time among three presidents in which different political trends took part. The communiqué pointed out that the Syrian people deserve praise for their firm determination to render the elections a success despite threats by the armed terrorist groups. The final communiqué also referred to the responsibility of the U.S. for the ugly crimes committed by the terrorists against the Syrian people, as these militant groups receive arms and aid directly from the West and some regional countries. Due to the high turnout in the presidential elections, the election committees in Damascus continued counting votes, which will be announced once the counting is complete. A ballot counting process began in the election centers in several Syrian governorates, including Homs, As-Suwaida, Idlib, Dar'a, Al-Qunaitira, Latakia, Tartus, and other areas. The polling stations across the country yesterday witnessed a heavy turnout by the Syrian citizens who flocked to cast their ballots in the presidential elections, bracing the threats of the terrorists and sending a message to the whole world that Syria will remain a place of democracy and freedom.
On the election day, millions of Syrian voters lined up in front of the polling stations to determine that through the ballot boxes they will challenge the mortar shells as well as the external aggression. The Syrians celebrated the democratic scene that bothered Syria's enemies, who watched a surge of enthusiastic voters determined to keep united in the face of terrorism, choosing to deliver their country into the bank of safety and security. Yesterday's presidential elections represented a victory of the Syrian people and asserted Syria's unity and integrity, from Dar'a to Aleppo, from Homs to Deir ez-Zor, and from Suwaida to Latakia, where the voters decided on their strategic choices of independence, development and resistance, and on standing alongside the emerging international alliance against imperialism. Many voters stressed that their participation was a gesture of loyalty to the sacrifices made by the Syrian Arab Army in defense of Syria. Due to the high turnout in almost all the 9,601 polling centers across the country, the deadline of the election process was expanded for 5 hours more until midnight yesterday.
The delegation of Syrian expatriates coming from Kuwait to take part in the presidential elections visited 601 military hospital in Damascus and met a number of wounded soldiers who showed great heroism in their defense of the homeland against international terrorism. Members of the delegation expressed joy at taking part in the presidential elections and the victories achieved by the Syrian people. They presented symbolic gifts to the wounded soldiers in an expression of gratitude to their great sacrifices. The Minister of Religious Endowments, Dr. Muhammad Abdul Sattar al-Sayyid, accompanied by a number of Muslim scholars, visited Patriarch Ignatious Afram II Kareem and congratulated him for being inaugurated as the Patriarch of Antioch and the whole East and a supreme head of the Syriac Orthodox Church in the world, succeeding the late Mar Ignatius Zakkai was. Minister al-Sayyid stressed during the meeting that the presidential elections held yesterday presented a unique picture of the national unity among different religious groups in Syria who live in peace and harmony. For his part, His Holiness Mar Ignatius Kareem said his participation in the election came to stress the climate of religious coexistence among different doctrines and beliefs in Syria. The supreme leader of the Iranian Islamic Revolution, Ali Khamenei, said that the supporters of the armed terrorist Takfiri groups who commit crimes in Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, Iran and other Arab countries are the top enemies of the region. Khamenei, who was speaking on the occasion of the 25th anniversary of Imam Khomeini's death, that the U.S. administration adopts all types of plans and schemes to impose its hegemony on the countries of the region. He made it clear that the United States of America stands behind all the terrorist groups in Iraq, Syria and Afghanistan as it offers financial and military help to them. Khamenei emphasized that Iran stands firm against all the Zionist plans in the region. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov and his U.S. counterpart John Kerry are to discuss the Syrian and Ukrainian crisis in Paris tomorrow. Russian Foreign Ministry asserted that any kind of reapproachment between the U.S. and Russia on each of the Syrian and Ukrainian issues will be considered a great success, pointing out that it is up to the U.S. partners to determine how far the discussions will reach. Finally, Russian ambassador to the UN, Vitaly Churkin, reasserted that Russia would oppose a draft resolution proposed by Australia, Jordan and Luxembourg and backed by the US, France and Britain on the humanitarian situation in Syria under Chapter VII of the UN Charters. On a question whether Russia is ready to vote on a draft resolution on the humanitarian issue in Syria under Chapter VII in exchange of backing a rival Russian draft resolution on Ukraine, Churkin said there is no connection between the two issues, adding that threatening Syria with this chapter that would pave the way for military intervention would hinder cooperation in the humanitarian field. He reiterated that Russia will continue working on its draft decision on Syria with regard to supporting national reconciliations in it. The Russian ambassador pointed out that stopping violence in Syria will accelerate effective delivering of humanitarian aid to the residents. With this, we end our news for today. Thank you for watching. For more details about Syria and the region and to view this bulletin again, you can always visit our website in English, syriaonline.sy. Now to latest business and market news with Vani Genjan, but after a short break.